I'm Jessica, the Museum Guide, and today I'm taking you on a tour throughout London to visit every cat statue here in the capital. There's 13 of them. London has a surprising number of cat statues, and that is even without counting all of its many lion statues. Today we're visiting 13 of them, from the north to the south and even inside the British Museum. We've got swashbucklers and family pets, mythical cats, beloved companions, and even gods. I want you to feel like you're traversing the city with me, so we're going to work our way kind of north to south and also west to east for this one, starting up in Archway with the most famous of all London cats. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm really delighted to have you here, and I'd love it if you subscribe. If you're a regular viewer, why not check out my Patreon channel? There, you'll get at least one extra video every month, as well as invitations to in-person tours. I'll put the link just above and below. Now, when I told my husband I was making this video, he was like, "Oh, Dick Whittington's cat." Yes. Now, sometimes people call this cat Thomas, Tommy, Tommy Tittlemouse, or even Mouser, but we don't know if he even existed, let alone what his name was. This cat's known simply as the pet of the real-life Richard Whittington. Now, he lived between 1354 and 1423. He was a wealthy merchant and later Lord Mayor of London, famously 4 times. But the real Whittington is a lot less interesting than the medieval tale that sprung up around him. In the legend, Dick Whittington wasn't high-born. He instead comes from a poor background. As a boy, he buys a cat from an old woman. Then he attempts to flee a life of menial kitchen labor by heading away from London, getting as far as right here, Highgate Hill. It is here that he hears the sound of the Bow Bells, and those bells promised he would be Mayor of London 4 times. He then pulled himself out of poverty by selling his clever cat, this one, to a rat-infested country. Now, believe it or not, there are versions of very similar stories that can be found in earlier centuries in Italy, Persia, and even Ethiopia. Now, here in England, since the 1600s, the tale of Dick Whittington and his cat has been a puppet show, an opera, a children's story, but Dick Whittington is most famous as a pantomime. Pantos are bawdy Christmas plays. I explain them in detail in my Strange Christmas Traditions video. The first recorded pantomime version of this story was in 1814, starring Joseph Grimaldi as Dame Cicely Suett, the cook. Now, you might remember the fascinating story of Grimaldi from my video on the strangest cemeteries in London. I just really love that, how over time all of my videos eventually start to link together in the most unexpected ways. Now, this panto is still performed very often today. Here in Catford, it's very fitting that their panto this year is Dick Whittington and his cat. Now, could you really hear the bells of St. Mary Le Bow, the famous Bow Bells that are located on Cheapside, from all the way up here in North London? Well, sound archaeologists, and yes, that exists, suggest that back in the 15th century, when the legendary story takes place, you very well might have been able to, without the chaotic noise and the tall buildings of modern London. But let's remember that in his 1656 chapbook, Dick actually hears the bells when he is just at Bunhill, and that's a much shorter distance from Cheapside. No matter what, Dick Whittington's cat has become a much-loved symbol of Archway and Highgate. Here he is as the logo for the Whittington Hospital right nearby, not to mention this pub. The stone itself is said to be the very spot where he heard the bells, and no one is sure when it was placed here, but there are many references to it being here for, quote, centuries. The cat statue was placed on top of the stone in 1964, and by the way, there is another statue of the cat, this time with Whittington, in the Guildhall. But wait, I want to tell you the weirdest part of this tale, pun intended. We need to talk about the real Richard Whittington again, and his grave at his home church of St. Michael, Paternoster, where there is a great stained glass of Whittington and this cat. Following bomb damage during the Blitz, some investigations were done to try to locate the exact spot of Whittington's grave. They were unsuccessful, but they did find an old mummified cat in one of the graves. Was this the Whittington cat? Well, it could have just been a good luck charm. Even in the Victorian period, desiccated cats were often placed in the walls and floorboards to ward off mice. Or it could have been a prank played on the archaeologists, or it could have been Dick Whittington's legendary feline friend. Now, this isn't our first, or even second, or even third mummified cat on my channel, and it won't be the last. There's even another one in this very video. Okay, we're taking a detour east now to visit Islington Green, just between Upper Street and Essex Road. This is one of the newest statues on our tour, and it's the most likely to pull on your heartstrings.
If you've ever had a pet that you've thought of as your soulmate, well, this next statue is for you.
This is a life-size bronze sculpture of Bob, a pretty remarkable street cat who belonged to a man called James Bowen. James met young Bob back in 2007 when James was in the midst of a battle with drug addiction. Poor little Bob was abandoned and injured, and James nursed him back to health. Caring for the cat gave him a renewed sense of purpose, and he credits Bob with giving him the strength to beat his addiction. Though he was homeless, he and Bob were inseparable. James even took him to busk and sell The Big Issue, a magazine written and sold by London's homeless population. James went on to write a series of best-selling books about their relationship, one of which was made into a film in 2016. Bob, who you can see was a very special boy, even played himself in the film. You'll notice that Bob is wearing a scarf, both a bronze one and a real one. He did indeed wear a scarf during his lifetime. The Daily Mail, sorry to quote them, called him the, quote, Imelda Marcus of woolly scarves. Now, Bob was tragically killed in a hit and run in 2020 at the age of 14. He had a good few years left, and so it was sad that his life was cut short in this violent and senseless way. Plans were almost immediately made to commemorate him with a statue. It was designed by sculptor Tanya Russell, and it's here, across from the Waterstones bookshop, where James would sit and write the first Bob book. At the unveiling, James said, "I'm so incredibly proud of Bob and grateful for the time we shared. He enriched my life from the moment I met him. He saved me and he touched the lives of millions, providing optimism to people around the world." Ugh, my heart.
Now, I actually had to wait my turn. There were other people queuing to get their photos with Bob. It was very meaningful for them. And you can see behind me that Bob actually has 3 bouquets of flowers that have been brought as mementos. My bad, there's actually 4. Before we move on to our next cat, I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, June's Journey. Museums are places of secrets and mystery, and if you like museums, intrigue, and solving problems, you'll love stepping into June Parker's shoes and solving hidden object mysteries in the world of the Roaring 1920s. I love the hidden object scenes. They really sharpen my observation skills, and then I get to decorate my island and build my own world. This is perfect for escaping into when I need to relax. When I level up and collect rare items, I feel like I'm curating my own personal museum. And that's all while keeping my brain engaged instead of mindless scrolling. Plus, I really want her hat. The game also includes seasonal content and special events, and you know I can't wait for Halloween. Join me over on June's Journey. Download the game for free by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code. June's Journey is available on iOS and Android mobile devices, as well as on PC. Remember, please download the game from the QR code or the link in the description box below. That way, they'll know that I sent you.
Now we're zipping back over to Mornington Crescent.
Behind me, you can see the Carreras cigarette factory building, which is home to quite a few black cats. You can see the cat from the logo just below the top row of windows. Now, demand for cigarettes really increased during World War I. Remember, they were included in soldiers' rations kits, and so the Carreras Cigarette Company started doing very, very well. You can see their really cool Art Deco logo there just above the doorways. Now, Carreras outgrew its old factory in City Road, and so they opened up this in 1928. It's just across the street from Mornington Crescent. The architects were Marcus Evelyn Collins Collins and O.H. Collins, and later Arthur George Pori, who adapted their plans. Obviously, this building was inspired by the Egypt Mania Part 2 that was sweeping the continent after World War I. Remember, this was just 4 years after Howard Carter's expedition and discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun. And so Egypt-themed buildings, fashion, designs were everywhere. There's another connection too. In the 1910s and 20s, Egypt was one of the world's most successful producers of tobacco, cigars, and cigarette products. Tobacco companies of all kinds wanted to take advantage of this reputation and use Egyptian motifs in their branding. So the black cats here were obviously meant to reference Bastet, but there's another connection to black cats. A black cat had been the logo for the company since the 19th century because the owner had a little pet black cat in his Soho shop. He was called Don Jose Joaquin Carreras Ferrer, and the black cat would become the logo of their Craven A cigarette brand. The white building itself is supposed to look like it is rising out of the sand, and it's lined with a colonnade of these 12 papyriform columns. They're painted with bright colors and Venetian glass decorations. Now, these majestic cats are referencing Bastet, the grand Egyptian cat god. Originally, the building was supposed to be called Bast House to reference these cats, but that word was understandably seen to have too close a connection to some choice insults in the English language, and so it was called Arcadia Works instead. Sadly, many of the Art Deco decorations are now lost, as well as a staircase decorated with serpent railings. Thankfully, the building survived the massive cull of Art Deco buildings that took place in the 70s, 80s, and 90s throughout the world, and this building today is offices. Not very exciting, but it's amazing that we still have the black cats here.
Now it's time to head to Euston Station.
This is a statue commemorating Captain Matthew Flinders and his beloved cat, Trim. Trim is depicted here with his human owner, cartographer Matthew Flinders. We're just outside Euston Station, and this was unveiled in 2014, just after the bicentenary of Flinders' death. Now, Flinders is very famous in Australia, but he's not that well known here, at least not by name. But his cat is increasingly well known. Now, Trim lived from 1899 to 1804, but during his relatively short life, he did more than most of us ever will, accompanying Flinders on his voyages to circumnavigate and map the coastline of Australia. This took place between 1801 and 1803. Flinders was also the first person to use the name Australia for that continent and country. However, Trim's life was almost cut very, very short. After he was born aboard the HMS Reliance on a voyage between the Cape of Good Hope to Botany Bay, the wee little kitten fell overboard. He managed to locate a rope on the side of the ship's rigging, scale it using his teensy little claws, and get back on board. As Flinders and his crew watched, they were immediately endeared to the tenacious little cat, and he became their favorite. Flinders named him Trim, after the butler in Lawrence Sterne's novel Tristram Shandy. After the circumnavigation of Australia, which you can see depicted here on the memorial, Trim stayed with Flinders, and the cat actually survived the shipwreck of the HMS Porpoise on Wreck Reef in 1803. I mean, talk about 9 lives. He was a really lucky cat, but that luck would soon run out. In 1804, Flinders' boat docked unexpectedly, to him at least, in French-occupied Mauritius. England and France were at war at that time, and he was accused of spying and imprisoned by the French. Trim, however, was imprisoned with him, and that must have been a huge comfort. However, Trim soon went missing and was never found. The legend says that Trim may have even been caught and eaten by a hungry enslaved person, and if that is true, I don't blame that person one bit. If you have to choose between ending a cat's life or ending your own, you're probably going to have to go with the cat. There's also a good chance that that was just a legend or some kind of propaganda. Who knows what really happened to Trim? But Flinders was obviously deeply bereft. I mean, now he's in his jail cell without his cat. He wrote a tribute to Trim while he was in that cell, where he would stay until 1810, by the way. He said that Trim was, quote, one of the finest animals I ever saw. His robe was a clear jet black, with the exception of his 4 feet, which seemed to have been dipped in snow, and under his lip, which rivaled them in whiteness. He also had a white star on his breast. This statue is such a sweet tribute. Look at the way that Trim's little paw is raised like he's making biscuits. Now, when Flinders returned from prison in Mauritius 6 full years later, he began working on his magnum opus from the voyage. It was published just 1 day before he died in 1814. Now, he was buried somewhere here in Camden, but the graves in this area have been dug up and moved and switched and moved around throughout the last couple of centuries, mostly because of the railway lines and the railway stations. So the location of his grave was lost over time. There was an urban legend that Flinders was buried under platform 15 here at Euston Station, and that's why the statue was placed here in 2014. It was designed by Mark Richards. However, during the construction of the HS2 high-speed line, archaeological investigation was conducted on St. James Churchyard just behind the station. Flinders' grave was unearthed in 2019, despite the fact that the quest was described as a needle in a haystack. Here is a photo of the archaeologist removing the breastplate on his coffin. His coffin's plate was made of lead rather than tin like most others, meaning it was still legible when others weren't. As of July of last year, 2024, Flinders' remains were returned to his hometown in Donington, Lincolnshire. You can see that Flinders is using the instruments that he used to survey the continent, and there is a lovely museum connection in the area, just a few steps away from Euston. See, his grandson, William Flinders Petrie, would go on to be considered one of the fathers of modern archaeology, and the Flinders Petrie Museum, located at my alma mater, University College London, is one of the world's largest collections of Egyptian and Sudanese objects. Let me know in the future if you'd like me to do a video about the Petrie Museum and some of the ethical concerns there. But speaking of cats at sea, I also want to mention Simon, who features in my video of the strangest graveyards in London. His remains are buried in the Ilford Animal Cemetery, and his story is well worth watching, after this video, of course.
We're a short walk now from Euston Station, here at Heel's Furniture Shop on Tottenham Court Road, and we can see this elegant cat sitting in the spiral staircase, seated on a small Art Deco plinth. This staircase, often called London's Most Photographed, was commissioned by grandson of original owner Ambrose Heel and designed by his cousin and best friend Cecil Brewer. The sculpture was designed by French sculptor Chassin and reputedly bought by Heels in 1925. They planned to sell it, but it soon became a popular local mascot, and by 1933 you could buy this postcard calling it the Cat on the Stairs, mascot of Heel's shop. Heel's cat went on to inspire Dodie Smith, the author of 101 Dalmatians. She worked here when she was a struggling artist, and in her autobiography, Look Back with Astonishment, she wrote, "On the sill of a window that lit it was a very tall bronze cat, really a serval, which I came to think of as the presiding deity of Heels. I later let it be known that it would grant wishes, and I was to see various members of the staff reaching up rather furtively to touch its paws." She claimed that she once accidentally sold the cat for £40, a huge sum of money then, but her boss wasn't best pleased. Ambrose Heel himself wrote to the customer and cancelled the sale. He then commissioned a sign to go next to the cat that said, "Heel's mascot, not for sale." Now, Dodie may have embellished that tale a tad, but regardless, the cat is still here. Now for something completely different. We're heading into the British Museum just a few steps away from Heels. Some of you may have watched my very first video ever, The Oddities of the British Museum, and in it I include this eerie mummified cat. But there is another very famous cat in this museum, and she is downstairs in the Great Egyptian Sculpture Hall. This is the Geyer Anderson cat, named for General Robert Grenville Geyer Anderson, who, along with his good friend Mary Stout Shaw, owned the sculpture in the early 20th century and then bequeathed it to the museum. Geir Anderson was an Irish surgeon, soldier, colonial administrator, and collector, and as a self-proclaimed Orientalist, he loved to dress up in so-called Arab garb. Edward Said would have a field day. Now, Geir Anderson is best known for his eponymous museum in Cairo. It's located in a preserved 17th century house where he lived between 1935 and 1942, filled with a magnificent collection of curios, carpets, and furniture. I really want to head back to Cairo and visit. This sculpture is made of bronze and dates to the late period, which is about 664 to 332 BCE. It represents the female cat deity Bastet, a manifestation of the Eye of Ra, who was a goddess of pleasure and a protector of pregnant women. She could also be used as a ward against contagious disease and evil spirit. Now, Bastet started out as a much fiercer lion-headed goddess, but over time, as the Egyptians domesticated cats, her more fierce attributes were passed on to her sister goddess, the wrathful goddess Sekhmet, also here at the British Museum, and Bastet became the domestic cat goddess we now know and love. Egyptians loved cats for their mousing capabilities and their overall hunting prowess, but also for their louche nature and their nurturing mothering. Bastet's name translates to she of the ointment jar, so you'll see a lot of jars bearing her iconography as well. Now let's get back to this particular kitty, arguably the most famous Bastet statue in the world, and her ostentatious gold jewellery and protective Wadjet amulet. If they look a little bit out of place, they are. It's likely that Geir Anderson added them to make the statue look more exotic than it was originally. That's so typical of the era. Now, when he first bought it, it was, quote, covered with a heavy coating of crystalline verdigris and crisp flakes of red patina, which he carefully chipped away. Again, this was typical of the era. The statue is actually quite damaged internally. It has undergone some x-rays, and they reveal that there are cracks that extend almost completely around the center of the cat's body. There's this weird cylinder inside that's holding the cat's head on, and Geir Anderson also seems to have done these repairs. Now let's finish with this statue by bringing it back to the cat mummies. Traditionally, bronze statues like these were the preferred offerings to the goddess Bastet, especially at her main temple in Bubastis. However, in the late period, it became more popular to offer actual mummified cats. After all, they were much cheaper and believed to contain the cat's divine energy. That way, everyone could afford to make an agreeable offering. Okay, now we're just a short walk from the British Museum. We have two back-to-back statues in Bloomsbury to visit in two different squares just steps away from each other. We're starting here in Queen Square Garden, and this is Sam, positioned over the wall, just about to jump down.
It's really easy to miss. It's just tucked away in the corner by the Queen's Larder pub.
Sam helps us to memorialize his owner, Patricia Penny Penn. Penny was a nurse and local activist who fought to protect the area's historic buildings. I like her style. In her golden years in the 1970s and 80s, she campaigned against the demolition of some of Holborn's oldest buildings and protested against the poor living conditions provided by private landlords. She called Sam her alter ego, and when she had some particularly juicy news, she would say that Sam had told her. She passed away in 1991 at the age of 77, but Sam makes sure that we fondly remember her. He's been designed to look like he's kind of on the prowl, out to collect that gossip for Penny. Like a statue that we'll see later on, Sam was stolen back in 2007, but in 2009, a new Sam was unveiled. This one fitted with steel rods driven into the bricks.
I love his little dangly feet.
Now, as I mentioned, just a few steps away, we can find the Alf Barrett Playground. And here is another cat sculpture, created by a woman called Marcia Deborah Solway. And we can see that the cat's name is Humphry. Humphry was the resident cat for 18 years at the Mary Ward Centre in Queen Square, where Marcia was a student of sculpture. Humphry was a big old ginger Tom, and he loved to tramp around the area and hunt for rodents. He was known as a brilliant mouser. Humphry was named for novelist Mary Ward, the namesake of this charity. Now, she was a 19th century novelist who campaigned for the poor in this area. She wrote under the name of Mrs. Humphry Ward, her husband. But it was actually a man called Richard who was closest to the cat, feeding him even when the centre was closed. When Richard died a few years later, a wreath was placed around Humphry's neck in his honour. Marcia sadly suffered with epilepsy and was a patient here at the National Hospital, Queen Square. She passed away in 1992, the same year as Humphry. She was only 34. Her father says that she was an ardent cat lover and she would be delighted that her sculpture was moved here to this children's playground from its original home in the square, near where Sam is now. The playground is used by children from Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, which is just around the corner, somewhere where Marcia was also a patient. The children love to give him eyes and whiskers, making him a little less modernist. Now, the Heels cat isn't London's only Art Deco sculpture acting as a brand mascot. We're now here at the iconic Savoy Hotel.
A 5-star London institution known for its stunning Art Deco architecture and the fact that its driveway is the only place in the UK where cars drive on the right. We can see this fabulous topiary in the shape of a stylized cat. This is a depiction of Caspar, with a K, the famous Savoy cat, but we need to go inside to actually find him, so let's go. Now, I've never actually stayed here. I mean, tour guiding pays well, but not that well. But I have come into the American bar for cocktails, and I visited this boy in the past. He was carved from a single block of plain wood in 1898 by Basil Ionides. He made this cat in the months after diamond magnate Wolf Joel hosted an infamous dinner here. See, one of Joel's guests canceled at the last minute, and the group, probably into the champagne, started riffing on the fact that their party now numbered 13 people. The most superstitious amongst them refused to be the first to rise from the table, thinking that the first one to leave would be the first to die. Now, Joel was too sophisticated for that kind of nonsense. He confidently rose after his meal, and a few weeks later, he was murdered, shot in Johannesburg. People started cancelling bookings at the Savoy, especially those with 13 guests, and so the hotel management, wanting to be sure that this never happened again, vowed to plant one of their staff members at the table to round things up to 14 whenever needed. That made for some awkward dinner conversation, and so they had a better idea. Basil Ionides' elegant cat, named Caspar, will now join you to avoid any parties of 13. Of course, you can imagine that many people want this cat as their vaunted guest, so parties of 13 are actually now quite popular. For a number of years, the hotel's fish and seafood restaurant was called Kaspar's, and today he serves as an unofficial mascot for the hotel. He's also the main star of Michael Morpurgo's popular children's book, Caspar, Prince of Cats.
Okay, from the Savoy, let's head into the old city of London to visit the cat that I visit most often as I guide my favourite macabre oddities tours. I released one of those last month on my Patreon. This is Hodge, and he belonged to 18th century polymath Samuel Johnson, most famous for compiling one of the first English language dictionaries. Johnson's biographer, James Boswell, described Hodge as a, quote, very fine cat indeed, and he was said to be blessed with an almost unnatural intelligence for a cat. We're here in Gough Square, across from number 17, the house where Johnson wrote most of his dictionary, though he did live at 17 different London addresses. This house is now a museum, and it's a very interesting place to spend an hour or so let me know if you would like me to visit in the future. According to lore, Hodge, a big grey Tom, loved oysters. Now, that might seem to you and I like he had expensive tastes, but this was a shockingly common thing to crave. Oysters, like cockles, mussels, whelks, and even scallops, were considered food for the poor. They were plentiful, fiddly, and hard to eat, and of course they could make you sick in the era before sanitation and refrigeration. London has long been known for its oysters. The Romans said we had the finest oysters in the empire, even when they were otherwise deriding us for our barbarism. For a man of Samuel Johnson's social standing, going to buy the oysters was actually even an insulting task for Johnson to ask his house servants to do, including his Jamaican servant, Francis Barber. He didn't want them to start resenting his favorite cat. So Johnson, posh as anything, would go and buy them down on the riverbanks. What Hodge wanted, Hodge got. Johnson even went and bought valerian root to ease Hodge's suffering as the cat's death approached. That's why we have all of these elements in the bronze sculpture. Hodge sits atop the dictionary next to a few oyster shells, and I've seen these shells filled with up to £5 in coins, and at Christmas time he gets all decorated with lights and ribbons. This statue was created by sculptor John Bickley in 1997, and he famously used his own cat, Thomas Henry, as the model. He said, quote, "I made Hodge about shoulder height for the average adult, which is just about right for putting an arm around." By the way, there's also a plaque here at Johnson's house dedicated to Francis Barber. He was born with the name Quashie. Though he was a black man during the time of slavery, he was Johnson's friend and eventually his chief heir. The House Museum is currently applying for an official blue plaque to honor his story. According to their bid, quote, "This is the only property still standing in the City of London that can be identified as the home of a formerly enslaved person who became an independent, valued memory of a household in the 18th century." I'm planning a video on hidden black history in London's museums and monuments, and hopefully that will be released next year. Now let's head over to Southwark Cathedral. You might remember this imposing church from my video about more macabre things in London churches. I featured their trancy tomb inside, the cadaver monument of Thomas Cure. But here I have another grave to show you, with a cat statue as its marker.
Here she is, hidden away under this tree.
This is the final place of rest for Doorkins Magnificat, a little street cat who became famous through her rags to riches story that was covered by major news outlets like the BBC, The Guardian, and more around the world. Now let's just have a pause and talk about the pronunciation. With my accent, her name is Doorkins. See, her name is a pun, but it doesn't work in my accent. Here, let's get my husband to say it. Hey, can you say the name of this cat for me, please?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Doorkins.
Ah, that's better. When he says it, you can hear that her name was a pun on Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist and atheist. The second part of her name, Magnificat, refers to the Song of Mary that the clergy sing every day, and she was a magnificent cat. She was a scrawny little street cat when she slipped through the side door of the cathedral. She was probably getting by scrounging at Borough Market. There's a lot of stray cats here. I've even seen foxes in the evening. The vergers began to feed her, and she knew where her bread was buttered. She started coming here every day. Now, there have been a number of cats at Southwark Cathedral, and Doorkins was not the friendliest. I remember meeting her. She blanked me. But people loved to play Spot the Doorkins. The best was when she curled up in the nativity straw. She was nonplussed when the Queen came to Southwark Cathedral to celebrate the installation of a window in honour of her Jubilee, and the Queen asked, "Does this cat live here?" In 2007, Doorkins became the subject of a picture book about her life as the cathedral's mouse-catcher-in-chief, and in 2018 she was honoured with the coolest tribute. This gargoyle in her image holding a fish in its mouth on the north wall. This is just the best. I love this. Now, even though she got the royal treatment here, literally, she moseyed in and out of the church, coming and going as she pleased. However, when the church was locked down after the Borough Market terrorist attacks in 2017, she was trapped outside for a few days. When the doors reopened, she scurried back in, and she never left. She was an old gal, though. I was lucky enough to see her in her elder years. With failing sight and hearing, she retired to the countryside and to the home of the head verger, Paul Timms. She died peacefully in his arms on the 30th of September 2020. News outlets like CNN and The Guardian published eulogies, and a special service of Thanksgiving was held for Doorkins on 28th of October 2020. It was live-streamed around the world, with thousands watching her small wooden coffin being presented to Andrew Nunn, the Dean of Southwark. Even at the height of COVID, it reminded us that there is nothing so pure as the love of a pet. In the wake of some ruffled feathers about holding a service for a cat during the pandemic, the Dean said, "She did more to bring people into this place than I will ever do." Not too shabby for a street cat. By the way, there's a new cat here. His name is Hodge, in honor of a cat we've already met, and he surprised me and also blanked me.
Look at who we have here. Psst, 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 psst. Blanked. Psst, 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 psst. I'm now all the way over here in Bermondsey, known for its craft breweries. That's not a bad idea after a long day of filming. Along the Thames wall here, we're approaching a moving memorial to an entire family called the Salters. It's called Dr. Salter's Daydream, and it was designed by sculptor Diane Gorvin, originally back in 1991. Alfred Salter, you can see him seated here on the bench, was born in 1873, just down the river in Greenwich, and he studied medicine at Guy's Hospital, specializing in public health. As a young doctor, he became a resident here at a Methodist hospital in Bermondsey. Back then, and still in some areas today, this was actually a very, very poor place, one of the most deprived in all of Victorian London. Salter set up mutual health insurance schemes and adult education classes on health matters. He married Ada, you can see her here, who shared his political views and his Quaker faith, and they had one child. You can see her here. This is their beloved Ada Joyce. Tragically, as scarlet fever swept through the slums, Joyce succumbed to that illness. The couple did remain dedicated to their principles, and they became heavily involved in the Labour Party. In 1922, Ada became the first female mayor of this borough, and in fact any London borough. And Alfred became an MP for Bermondsey in the same year, a role that he would hold until his death in 1945. There are 4 statues in total. This one over here depicting Alfred Salter as an old man sitting on a bench. Now, think of it this way. He's imagining his life decades earlier. His gleeful daughter Joyce is still alive, and his wife Ada is here looking onward, as well as their family cat. Sadly, he's unnamed, but what a good boy, helping Mr. Salter relive the happiest moments of his life. A different version of the sculptures used to be further along the river in Rotherhithe, but in 2011 the seated statue of Alfred was stolen. God. For a few years, the statues of Joyce and the cat were removed for safekeeping, but money was raised to hire the original sculptor, Gorvin, to imagine her work. Joyce and the kitty are original, but she also added the statue of Ada, and the new configuration of the 4 of them here was added in 2014. Seeing all the statues together is actually quite moving.
Our final stop is very far south indeed, in the borough of Lewisham, almost in Kent really. We're here in Catford, home to this massive fiberglass cat sculpture reaching down to paw at the F of Catford. And of course, I had to come here for this video. The sculpture was installed in 1974 when the estate was built, and this is such a particular kind of 1970s British brutalism. They were trying to become the Barbican of the South, trying to evoke the artsy sophistication of that housing estate in the city of London, but it never quite happened. Architects Owen Luder and Rodney Gordon designed ambitious buildings in the centre of Catford and around the country, but when you Google them, this cat is often the first result, so I wonder how they'd feel about that.
It is so much bigger than I expected it to be. I almost got some megalophobia. That's the fear of large statues and buildings.
Now, as recently as 2017, Lewisham Council was talking about removing the Catford cat. While some locals were delighted to see the back of it, other proud Catforders, Catfordtonians, Catfordites, rallied to keep the statue, including thousands who signed this petition. Never let them tell you that people don't have the power. The Catford residents were successful, and Lewisham has assured residents that the Catford cat is here to stay for generations to come. I personally love it. It's really incongruous with all the brutalism here, but it adds a lot of whimsy and character, which I suppose all of the cats on our tour today do for their surroundings.
Well, that's the end of our tour today. I hope you've enjoyed learning all about the different cat statues in London, and you'll join me over on June's journey. Remember, please click on the QR code below or on the link in the description box. That way they'll know that I sent you. I'll see you the next time I'm in the museum.